Welcome to Narratives and Nightcaps. In today's special episode, we're talking to author MK Pagano about her debut novel, Girls Who Burn, available July 16th in the US and July 18th in the UK. As we'll talk about, MK writes stories about messy girls, mayhem, and murder, as you'll see on her website. But when she's not busy thinking about and writing about fictional people, she can be found reading, dreaming about restoring an old French chateau, which us too, or wandering the weirder parts of New Jersey. Welcome to our show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So are we. Congratulations again. I'm sure this is a whirlwind right now, but we're so excited for you and so thrilled to be a part of your journey with this debut.
Yeah, today, the day we're recording, is the day my book comes out. So it's a little surreal. I haven't quite made the connection yet that today is the actual day.
I can imagine. That's amazing, though. Well, before we talk about that really quick, since the show is Narratives and Nightcaps, we're curious if you have a go-to drink of any sort, even if it's just water or coffee, tea, anything along those lines.
Yeah, when I'm writing, I drink coffee. Occasionally, if it's evening and I'm hitting a wall creatively, I will have a little wine because being a little tipsy can help with flow the creative juices. But I do write YA, so I must say I'm not condoning underage drinking by any means. It's for adults only. But yeah, those would be my nightcaps.
Do you have a go-to like red, white, rosé?
I like red wine, French red wine, predictably, because I'm a Francophile. Burgundy red is my favorite.
Very nice. Yeah, hard to beat writing with a nice glass of wine. And likewise, we certainly don't condone underage drinking, and drink responsibly, even if you're of age. So that's amazing. We're both coffee people too, as well. So we can relate to that. Let's talk a little bit about the book. So just came out. For anyone that hasn't read it yet, just got it. What is your book all about?
So I'm bad at the brief pitch, but I'll try it. My book is about a girl named Addie. She lives in a small town in Northwest New Jersey, and her sister was found dead in the woods behind her house last summer. She accused the rich boy down the street of killing her sister, Fiona, because she witnessed this explosive argument between them right before her sister died. But he's never arrested. The police ruled the death an accident. She's incensed. She thinks because he's from this wealthy, influential family, that's how he got away with it. She tries to get them to reopen the case, but it's a year later. Nothing has happened. She's trying to move on when she finds the boy who she accused of murdering her sister dead in the same place, in the same way. So then she has to admit she was wrong. And she has to team up with that boy's cousin. His name is Seth, also from this wealthy, corrupt family, because Seth and Addie were actually together during both murders. So he's the only person that she can really trust. But they have this long, complicated history. They've known each other since they were little kids. They have had some stuff happen in the past. They have kind of a frenemy relationship, is how I call it. But now he's the only person she can rely on. And they spend the book trying to figure out who killed their sister and cousin, respectively, and why. And pretty much every character in the book is a suspect at one point or another. And there's some reignited romance there as well.
Yeah, a little enemies to lovers sort of situation with Seth and Addie. Hopefully we can talk about that. There's a lot of different elements to this, which I really like. So, and I think topics that both of us really enjoy when it comes to reading. So,
yes. The whole book, this is up my alley. This is for me, for sure.
This is definitely a Megan book for 100%.
Good to hear.
Before we get into all of that and the different themes, though, I want to go back to the beginning because I saw a lot on your website, too. You're very honest and transparent about your writing journey and how this really isn't the first book that you've written. Can you
Yeah.
talk to us a little bit about that, though? Because I don't know that people realize how common that is, that your debut book isn't always the first book that you've been working on.
Yeah, for sure. So I completed 5 other books before this book. I have a bunch of partially written, written stuff out there too. Not out there, just on my computer because I don't share it unless it's good. Yeah, my very first book I started writing over 10 years ago now. I queried it. Nobody wanted it. It was not good. I thought it was good. It was not good. I wrote my second book. It took me a few more years to finish that. I was a very slow writer at first. That book actually did get me a literary agent back in 2018. But that book, I was calling it a YA contemporary, so was my agent. It ended up dying on submission, which is when you submit it to publishers and they all reject it. I got some very lovely rejections, and they all said, this book is too quiet for a thriller. And I was confused because I thought I'd written a contemporary, but it did have a missing girl element to it. And so meanwhile, I wrote 2 other contemporaries. I tried to write a fantasy with no magic, which I'm not sure you can do. But then my first agent, after we were revising a different contemporary, and our notes were not matching up. And she actually said, hey, I don't think I'm the best agent for you anymore. Because I talked about this book. I had started writing Girls Who Burn, and she really wasn't a thriller agent. She was like, don't feel like you have to write a thriller just because of those rejections. And I was like, no, I want to. But she actually set me free, which was devastating at the time, but it was the best thing she could have done because we just weren't a match. She was a great agent, but we just weren't a match anymore. So then I finished writing Girls Who Burn in early 2021 and started querying that. It took me about 6 months to find another agent with that. But once I did find my amazing agents, I actually have 2 agents, it sold actually really quickly. We did an exclusive submission, which is when you submit it just to one editor at one publisher, give them a hard deadline, and they have within that time to offer. And my editor offered in under 2 weeks. So
Wow.
it was crazy. After literally over a decade of writing and hoping and trying, my book was like sold to Penguin Random House. I was like, okay, great.
Wow. That's incredible, though. I know that's easy for us to say, like, you've put in so many years and the hard work, but the fact that you've been persevering and so determined and like willing to learn too is really inspiring to me and us, and hopefully other people listening too, because I feel like your journey is a very real journey that a lot of people don't necessarily see, just on the reader side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have these phrases like overnight sensation, but like if you look into it, maybe a tiny percentage of people make this happen really fast. And I also don't think it's necessarily what a new writer starting out wants to hear. Like nobody wants to hear, oh, you'll reach your goals in about 10 years. But the path can be very winding, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think I'm a much better writer now than I am with even my other book that died on submission. I'm much prouder of this book. So I'm actually grateful that it took this long to get published, because I think what I put out there is good, not to sound conceited, but
No, not at all. It doesn't. You put in a ton of work with it. So I think it's truly incredible too. And I'm appreciate to your honesty about it, because I know, I mean, I could see too, like it could potentially be hard to like relive that and share all of that too, to be like, yeah, I put in 10 years of work for all of this too, but it's honest and really authentic. And so I appreciate that you're very transparent about that, not only with us, but on your website too, which could be really inspiring to other people that are fans of your writing and maybe want to write something too.
I have a
So,
question. At what point, I mean, obviously you've been doing this for quite a while. At what point did you consider yourself an author? Like by your definition, by your standards?
I mean, I don't think I started using the word author until my book sold. I think
Okay.
I've been calling myself a writer for probably a couple years after I started, but I think you can use writer pretty much as soon as you start writing. Like,
Okay.
you're a writer.
That's good because I feel like there is, I mean, some people I think gravitate toward one term versus another, and so I was just curious where that line was for you.
Mhm. Yeah, for
That's a
sure.
great question. So you alluded to it that in your story, everybody's a suspect. It is a whodunit mystery. But you also explore, and you also mentioned this too, some different themes of like privilege, wealth, and power, while Addie and Seth are investigating this and then have to face what I mean, the wealth and power that his family has, and has that impacted the police investigation. Um, these topics, like, I think they're more common today, even though we didn't really used to talk about them. But why did you really want to make sure that these were included in your story specifically? Or did you know from the beginning that those were going to be elements?
Um, I mean, most of the books I've written, if not all of the books I've written, have some kind of comment on the wealth gap. I think it's just something that comes out pretty naturally. And like sometimes you don't even decide to consciously, like, I don't go into a story being like, this is what this story is about. I kind of write it and then I'm like, okay. And it takes me a draft or two to be like, oh, this is what I'm trying to say, or one of the things I'm trying to say. And that I grew up, I'm not from the woods. I'm from like a beach town in New Jersey. And I grew up in a town where there are these very wealthy people who come down just for the summer. They live in these giant mansions that are just empty the rest of the year. And I was always, I'm a local. I'm from here. I worked in the restaurants. I worked in the coffee shops, like waiting on these people who kind of have had everything handed to them and yet are terrible tippers. And it just, I think, just kind of seeing that, just the gap. Yeah, it's a wealth gap. And I'm very much, I grew up very much middle class. When you think of people who grew up in poverty, like gap gets even wider. And so I just have always found that interesting. And I think I kind of channeled some of that frustration into Addie. And she's trying so hard to get the police to pay attention to the fact that her sister did not die by accident. And the moment the wealthy kid dies, they immediately kind of open a murder investigation. And she's like, that's just not fair. And it's true. It's not fair. It's how the world is, and it's not fair. And I think writing about it kind of helps channel some of that frustration. And that has come out in a few other of the books I've drafted as well.
Yeah. Well, you're also speaking to two true crime lovers who
Mhm.
certainly see that in real cases out in the world too, where the wealthy person, the white person,
Mhm.
the pretty cheerleader
Mhm.
gets the coverage, but not necessarily the Black person or the person on the streets, anything like that. So it is definitely a very relevant and real topic.
Yeah,
Um,
for
but
sure.
yeah, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, and I didn't even delve into like the racial aspect of it because I'm a white writer. I didn't want to tell a story that's not mine to tell. But yeah, in real life, that's obviously much, much worse.
Absolutely. No, but I think for you, it's interesting, like this light personal tie too, that then you were able to put into this character with Addie. So about her too, she's a complex young woman too, and obviously there's a lot of anger that we can tell just in talking with you and knowing what this story is about. But describing that as like anger too, you can also relate that to someone who's then probably very strong and very fierce and certainly determined to solve her sister's murder. I'm sure you sort of, with your personal ties, you said that that kind of contributed, but what else was driving you to really create her as a character?
I think just the unfairness of someone dying young. I think whenever that happens, it just, you get so angry, and if you don't have anywhere to direct it, it can feel kind of overwhelming. So she kind of poured it into this murder investigation, poured it into this family, and a lot of people were like, hey, like it was an accident, you need to let it go. And turns out she was correct that it was not an accident. But in real life, I feel like we often, if something like that happens and it is an accident or somebody dies from an illness or something like that, you don't have anyone to be angry at. That can be really overwhelming. So I wrote a character where she can channel her anger somewhere, and that's towards whoever killed her sister, but she doesn't know who killed her sister. So that makes it a bit, well, that's what the book is about. So,
Yeah.
So now you have to go read it to find out.
Was there any specific crime or story or family that kind of inspired you? Because my head right away kind of, I don't know, newer-ish is like the Murdoch family murders. Again, they're like that wealth they have, this power of persuasion over law enforcement. Was there anything like that that kind of inspired this type of writing?
Um, no, honestly. I actually don't, I'm not super big into true crime, which always surprises people as a thriller writer, because I love thriller books. I love thriller stories. I love writing them. True crime tends to make me very sad because it has real victims, and I don't want to exploit their stories for my fictional stories. So honestly, no. So, sorry if that's not the answer you wanted
No,
to hear.
that's okay. I just, you think of there's so many things I think that could sound or feel like a very similar case to what you wrote that
Mhm.
it's like, oh, maybe there is a little tie here or something like that.
Mhm. No, I made it up. I come up with stories, I come up with the characters, I come up with the setting, and then I kind of have to figure out what happened. I don't come up with the crime first, which I know is not the way a lot of thriller writers operate, but that's how I operate. Yeah.
I think if we've learned anything, it's that there's no one right way to write
Mhm.
a book. Based on everyone that we've talked to, it's figuring out what works for you. There's a lot of different advice out there, and I think it's worth it to, at least for us, like I love hearing all of the different ways and then thinking like, oh, could that work for me or for that person? But it's
Mhm.
ultimately figuring out what works for you.
For sure.
In the midst of this mystery, there's also sort of this enemies to lovers complex history between Seth and Addie, like you said.
Mhm.
Um, was it fun to write the tension between the two of them?
That's my favorite part. Yeah. I mean, I think even before I had the plot nailed down, I was like, these are the two characters. This is their history. There's going to be the sexual tension is probably my favorite part of any book to write. It'll be included in anything I write, whether it's a contemporary, a thriller, a fantasy, whatever. If there's no romance plot, you know that somebody else is writing it and it's not actually me. Um, but yeah, that was my favorite part. I especially love writing a story between two people who have known each other since they were 5. And I think there's something so interesting in the dynamic between people who've known each other since they were little kids. Like you've literally seen each other like pee your pants or cry over your blocks or something. And then now you're these, well, they are technically adults, but they're also teenagers. They're 18 and 19. And you have all these complex teenage feelings and your adolescent hormones. And you're like, oh, this kid has irritated me my whole life. But then he grew up hot. Like, what am I supposed to do? And yeah, and so she's pissed at him at the start of the book because she thinks he's shielding his cousin, but then when his cousin dies too, she's like, "Oh, I'm the only person who knows how he feels right now because I just went through this." Plus, which I don't know if I mentioned before, the police are looking at both of them because they were both in the woods on both the night of both the murders, and their only alibi is each other. But then there's also this complicated class difference between them. He's from this wealthy family, and she's like, if they start looking at us and his family shields him, then it's just me. Is he going to protect me or is he going to save himself because he is one of these corrupt, wealthy Montgomery family people? So yes, that was probably my favorite part of the book to write was the dynamic between the two of them.
That's awesome. Okay, so it was the most exciting part. Did you have any challenges with it too, though?
Yeah, I think getting the romance in the way I wanted it to without slowing down the pace of the thriller. Because with a thriller, you really want people like turning pages, like wanting to know what happens next. It's not a romance novels in the strictly speaking genre sense, though I do think it would appeal to romance readers for sure. But there's also like the murder to figure out. And I think striking that balance was definitely difficult in drafts. Like there was a point, there's an only one bed scene, which you may remember. So there was a point where I considered cutting it. I'm like, do I have time for this little only one bed detour? And I love that scene, so I kept it in. Actually, while I was querying, I did get some feedback from some agents that were like, you can't have this much only one bed. You can't put this in a thriller. It slows down the pace. I got that feedback from some critique partners too, but I kept it in, and I found agents who loved it. I found an editor who loved it. I think my editor said it's her favorite scene in the whole book. So it's still there, and I love it. And if people don't, that's too bad, but I'm hoping they will.
On that note then, so is that your favorite scene, or do you have a different favorite scene? I know you said that that's probably like your editor's favorite scene, but what was another one that really stands out that either you're really happy with the way it turned out or was one of your favorites to write?
The only one bed scene is definitely up there in terms of favorite scenes, because it's kind of where they first admit they have feelings for each other again. But then there is a scene at the midpoint. I mean, do we spoil the book here, or do we not?
No, well,
No.
we try not to.
Okay. There's a scene at the midpoint where they're both in some imminent danger, and then there's a moment where they kind of stop and like tend to each other's wounds, and then some other stuff happens, and I liked that scene as well.
I love it. Yeah. Oh, no, so there are some episodes where we sort of book club it and we talk about the entire book, because we like to discuss like whether or not we ended it, did we both feel happy with the way that it went and what are our reviews of it overall. But for whenever we're talking to authors, like I want other people to be interested in your book and read it too. So don't want to spoil it for anyone yet.
Okay.
Awesome. Oh, shoot. There was something else I was going to ask, and then it slipped my mind with all of that. Oh, one thing, and I know that this is a favorite question of Megan's too, but I love your cover for this. How involved were you in that process? We've talked to some people that say I wanted no involvement and I just said, do what you will. And then we've talked to others that were like, no, I really had a vision for it. What was your experience?
Yeah, I didn't have a vision for it. So I was worried. I sent them like a Pinterest board that was kind of like my writing aesthetic, but it was mostly just pictures of like trees and like some ballerinas and like a couple mansions, like what I pictured the Montgomery mansion to look like. And I think I told them I wanted something kind of woodsy and a little wild, but also make it clear it's a thriller. And actually the first cover they sent me, it was very different. It almost looked like it belonged in like Yellow Jackets. It was like very wildernessy. And I was like, this looks like a forest fire is about to start, and that does not happen. Spoiler, it does not happen in my book. So I was like, can we try something else? And then they just came back with this, and it was, we had some discussion over the font, but it was perfect. And just, I love the smoke ballerina. I love the mansion. I'm looking at it right now. It's like right here. But yeah, I love it. I think it's so perfect. And I really love that. One thing I really tried hard to do was make the victim, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the term fridging, which is when in stories, it's when like you kill off a character at the beginning, usually a woman, and the entire book is about like the people who are trying to find out who killed her, but you don't really get to know the victim at all. So it's like you put the woman in the fridge, and then that's just the motivation for everybody else. But I really didn't want to do that with Fiona, with Addie's sister. Like, of course, she's dead at the start of the story, but I tried to make her kind of come alive through memories, through flashbacks, because I didn't want her to just be the motivation for the story, but like this fully realized character. And I wanted the reader to feel like, oh, it's really sad that she has been killed. And so I just love the fact that she is on the cover, and she's the only character on the cover. Like the smoke ballerina is her. She was a ballerina. So I love it. I love the spine. And then I don't know if you've seen the UK cover.
I don't think so.
It's pink. It has a matchbox with bloody fingerprints on the cover. It's completely different. And I love that one too. It's not something I would have come up with at all. Like it's hot pink. I don't have it with me, unfortunately, but I love that one too. And yeah, I had like a vague idea, but I never would have been able to tell them like, this is exactly what I want. That was all the cover designer and the team at Penguin. They did just an amazing job. I'm so sorry. The phone's ringing.
Oh, I don't even hear it.
Okay, great.
No, you're good. Well, now I really feel like I need to look up the UK cover because I'm intrigued to see how different they are.
Yeah, it's on Goodreads. You can see it.
Okay, I'll definitely look it up there because I want to see it. So your book is launching here today. What do you have planned? I know you have a couple of events. Are you doing anything to celebrate to this awesome milestone?
Today, I'm just going out to dinner with my husband and not my children, just the two of us. So, yeah, I mostly just worked today. Took my kid to swim lessons. A pretty normal day.
Me too.
But yeah. Did he hate it? Did he scream the whole time like
Oh
mine?
no, mine was a better experience than that.
Okay. Well, it's like baby and me swim lessons, so he's still not quite a fan of the water. So.
Just your normal day. But then you have a couple of events coming up soon, right? Okay.
Tomorrow I have an event in Jersey City at Word Bookstore. It's a place near and dear to my heart. I used to live in Jersey City. It's like one of my favorite cities in the world. And that was the bookstore I went to all the time. So I'm really glad that they could accommodate me. I was like, I don't technically live in Jersey City anymore. Can I still come? They were like, yes, of course. And then August 3rd, I have an event in Asbury Park, New Jersey, which is near where I live now, at the Asbury Book Cooperative. I expect that one to be a little crowded because I have a lot of local family and friends, but hopefully I will do well and not be too nervous. We'll see.
No, you'll be great. That's really cool. That's exciting. Okay,
Thank
one
you.
thing, and maybe Megan was thinking about this too, but you are a mom. How have you navigated writing for 10 years, this book launch, everything with being a mom as well?
I mean, when I first started writing, I was not a mom. I had my first daughter in, well, I have one daughter, one son. I had my first child in 2018. It's actually funny. The call from my first literary agent came on my due date. I was 9 months pregnant. She asked to have a call, and I was like, I don't want to postpone it. Because then what if I go into labor? So I took the call on my due date, did not go into labor that day, but went into labor the next day, and then had to like negotiate like the contract and everything, like as I'm recovering from childbirth.
Oh my gosh.
So that was fun. I think there's a picture of me like nursing a baby and signing the contract at the same time. And then with my second book, I was, I think, 7 or 8 months pregnant when I got the news that it would be published. And the picture of me getting the news is a terrible picture of me because I'm just so big and sweaty and gross. And but yeah, then in terms of, I think having local family has really helped out a lot. I wrote the majority of this book in 2020 during the start of the pandemic. And we were in this very small apartment in Jersey City. I got laid off from my full-time job, but fortunately my partner did not, so we were fine financially. And then my daughter had just started to walk, and we just, we weren't going outside at all at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so we ended up moving in with my mother-in-law and my father-in-law in the suburbs, and they had like a yard and we could walk around the neighborhood, obviously. And they're retired. And so they just spent a lot of time watching my daughter, and I suddenly had the first like free time for the first time in my life because I didn't have a full-time job. My kid was being entertained by my in-laws. I didn't have like an apartment to manage. I didn't have to think about dinner. My mother-in-law cooked dinner every night. It was really nice. Highly recommend living with your parents if you're too busy. But that's when I got the majority of the book written. And then we've since moved out, bought our own house and everything. But my parents live nearby as well. And then I think last year was actually the first time I started actually hiring childcare, because I always felt so guilty because I was still, after the pandemic started, I went back to work, but only part-time. And I figured because I wasn't working full-time, like I didn't deserve childcare, I guess, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to think, because like if you can afford it, having someone, I was just trying to write like during nap times, and that it's too scattershot. Like, so now I have someone who comes to my house Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the mornings, and that's my official writing time. I have afternoons where my mom will watch the kids, and that is extra writing time. That's where they are right now. So having help, either family or hired, I think is essential. I mean, I do know people who try and work while watching their kids, and I don't know how those people get anything done. But yeah, I think having kids has been good through this whole experience because it really grounds you too. Like I know other people are like freaking out the day their book comes out, but I was like, all right, I have to go swimming with my son. Like that's what I'm doing this morning. And like I think there's this idea I've seen online among like younger, newer writers that like you need to get published in your 20s, like because that is when all the successful people start. And that's just not true. It's so not true. It is when I started trying to get published, but I am not in my 20s anymore. And I don't know if I could have handled the amount of big feelings and all the setbacks as well as I can now. And I'm a little bit more mature. Um, so yeah, I would just say balance, giving yourself a little grace, not feeling like you're a bad parent because you hire a babysitter. I remember like debating whether or not to get a babysitter, and I was listening to an Elizabeth Gilbert podcast, and she said something about like, if you model martyrdom, your kids are going to grow up to be martyrs. If you model creativity, your kids can grow up to be creators. And I was like, oh, that is the most brilliant thing anyone has ever said to me. I mean, she was talking to everybody, but it sounded like she was talking to me. And I took that to heart. And I try and remind myself of that whenever I feel guilty for like not spending all my time with my kids.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to take that. And I don't have any kids, but just I think that's a really healthy reminder for a lot of people. But Megan is also very pregnant right now, so she can
Sure am.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
This is like one of her last interviews that she's doing on the podcast for a while.
Oh, are you due very soon?
August 28th is my
Oh, so
scheduled
exciting.
due date.
Yeah,
Well, good
so
luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah, number 2. So I'll be like you. I'll have a boy and a girl.
Yeah. They're great. I think I'm good with the 2 though,
Yeah.
but we'll see.
I was
Yeah.
curious too. You mentioned, you were working full time previously. Do you mind me asking what type of position or what field you were working in?
No, not at all. I started out in actually social media management. I eventually moved into positions that were more social media / content writing. And then I started working at startups where I was doing content writing, social media, and copywriting, like kind of anything writing related.
Mhm.
Though this was all before social media moved to largely video. So I feel like my skills have gotten a little outdated since then. Like I'm not a super great TikTok person. Um,
Neither
but
are we. So you're fine.
it's a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work. Like it was a full-time job with just
It
running
is.
social media. Um, I did a lot of blog writing, and I do miss that. I used to get to interview people and write about it at one of my jobs. And I was doing that freelance for a while, but after I had my son, I had sold my book, I just kind of focused on the writing and the children, obviously. And I'm fortunate that I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. I'm not like becoming a millionaire from selling one book. It's mainly my husband's income that supports us regularly.
I think that's a good reminder
Mhm.
to, like, yes, it feels huge, but there is like life still moves on. There are still bills to pay and mortgages to pay and things like that. So yes, I think
Mhm.
that's just a great reminder.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
do too. It's the realistic side of
Yeah.
books that isn't, we talk about this all the time, but they don't show that side in the movies.
No.
They make it seem like it does happen, overnight, and you're this young 20-something who has her book published, and then you throw a huge party and everybody loves it, and it's great and grand, and it's not that there's anything wrong with those as a narrative for film, but it's also not the reality. To your point too, and I know you were talking about this, but like I was just talking with someone who her debut book came out when she's in her 50s. Like there's no set timeline that you have to be a certain age to publish a book, and there are plenty of people older than that too that publish a debut book. So
Yeah, for sure. I think we're lucky that like we can do this at any age. Like I had a friend a long time ago who wanted to become an actress and break into acting, and it was the same time I was trying to become a writer. We're both in our 20s, and I was like, "Oh, it'll happen." And she's like, "You don't understand. Like I'm a woman trying to be on TV. I need to do it soon." And I was like, "Wow, that really sucks that it's like aging is going to be a factor, and like how you look is going to be a factor." And I mean, and I'm not gonna lie, like sometimes in publishing, I get a little frustrated because it seems like the books that like go viral on TikTok, like the author is always some like young, attractive girl, usually white girl. Those are the kinds of books that are doing well on TikTok. And I'm like, it shouldn't matter what an author looks like. It should matter how well they write their words. And social media has shifted that slightly, but that's not to say that it has to be that way. I know plenty of bestsellers who are not young and don't even have TikTok presences. But I totally agree. We do this at every age, and we should be able to do this at every age.
absolutely. You've given a lot of already incredible advice on so many different levels. But is there anything else that you can think of that you would say to someone, either a new writer, someone that wants to write, that you think they should know?
I mean, I would say I feel like there are so many people out there peddling like write your book in a month and get published next month, and like I think it's okay to take your time. Like I think it takes a while for most people. Some people are just naturally blessed with talent. I'm not going to pretend those people don't exist, but I think that's rare. I think it takes a while to develop your skill set, to figure out your methods, to write something really good. I think it can take time for most people. And it also takes time to figure out your best way of writing. Like I read a bunch of craft books when I was just starting out, which is great. Craft books are great, but some of them contradict each other. Like one of them is like, you must do an outline. Another one is like, don't outline. You're going to ruin your story. And neither of those are correct for everybody. Like Stephen King messed me up for a while with his book. That was like, outlines are going to kill your creativity. I was like, okay. And then I would start to write and be like, I don't know what's happening next because I don't have an outline. But some people are able to write that way. I think it's just a matter of figuring out what works for you. And that takes some time too. That takes a lot of trial and error. I think reading a lot is essential. Like there aren't a lot of hard and fast rules to becoming a writer, but I think reading is one that I would say is a hard and fast rule. I don't know anyone who's a good writer who's not also a reader. And like building a community, I think is important. And that can be tricky too, because you, most of the friends, all of the writing friends I've met online, and online relationships can be tricky because you're not quite sure who the person is at first. It like kind of takes a while to build that up. And you can obviously encounter people who are you're going to exchange manuscripts with them, and they're just not going to get back to you after you sent them like this thoughtful critique. You're going to find people that, yeah, that ghost you, that aren't the person that you thought they were. So that takes time to find like your people, like the good people who are going to be good writer friends and critique partners for you. Finding critique partners is essential to me. I know there are a handful of people who can work without getting feedback on their work, but not me. I need someone else's eyes on things because I get too close to the manuscript to be able to see what's wrong with it. And then you'll have your critique partner be like, hey, there's this giant plot hole in the middle of the book. And you're like, I didn't notice that. So yeah, I would just say take your time, read a lot, write a lot, find your people are the main pieces of advice that I have.
I think that's great advice. And the community one, I don't know that it's been mentioned in such depth before. But I think that that's a really good point. On that note of like being a reader, you said you like to read thrillers. Is there a book in particular that stands out that you always recommend, or even just a recent read that you really enjoyed?
I could talk about books for hours.
Oh, that's what we do. So
Okay. I mean, my favorite writer in the whole entire world is Tana French. I don't know if you've read her
yep.
books.
Oh yeah.
The Likeness is probably my favorite book in the entire world. I love that book so much. It's like a dark academia, toxic friend group. I find those books so interesting. And they're all set in Ireland too. They're so good. But yeah, I've read all of her books. Some recent reads. I recently read Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. She's a fellow debut. Her book was a Jimmy Fallon book club pick.
Oh, cool.
And I didn't think I could read it because I thought it would be too scary. But it's about a woman who's alone in her house during a snowstorm with her two young children, and somebody breaks in. And so I was like, well, I can't read this because I can't read things with children in danger. But I did ask her, because she's in my debut group chat, I was like, can you just tell me what happens to the children so I know whether or not I can read this? So she like basically spoiled that for me. And then I was like, all right, I'll read this, because I knew what was going to happen, at least to them. But I couldn't put it down. It was such a good read. Such a good read.
It sounds very eerie.
Another book I read recently, because I don't only read thriller. Do you want to hear about books that are not thrillers as
Yeah,
well?
of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, another book, because I have been making an effort to read a lot of my fellow debuts books. There's a book called Daughters of Sandong by Eve J. Chung, and it's historical fiction, which is something I do not usually gravitate towards, not for any reason, just because it's just not necessarily something I'll tend to pick up. But it's the true story, well, a fictionalized account of the author's own grandmother and great grandmother. And the great grandmother was married in this wealthy family during the communist China Revolution. And the family left her and her daughters behind because they were just women. And so they basically just had to save themselves. Like, they walked across all of China to get themselves out of the path of this revolution. And it was just such a powerful book about like mothers and children and daughters, and just like the resilience of women. And I can't stop thinking about that book. It's so good. It's so good.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds impactful.
And of course, I read a lot of YA. Can I give some YA recommendations too? Okay.
Yeah, we read and talk about basically any genre.
Okay.
So
Okay.
We try. We try really hard.
We try really hard.
There's so many good thrillers lately. Calcia Yu's It's Only a Game is a thriller about a girl who she's a gamer, and I'm not a gamer. My husband is, but I devoured this book. You do not have to be a gamer to enjoy it. And she finds herself kind of caught up in this like real life video game, like with like somebody gets killed in the game and then they get killed in real life, and she and her friends have to figure it out. It's so good. I don't know if you've read That's Not My Name by Megan Lally.
I know the book, but I haven't read it.
I read that in like a day. I could not put it down. And the twist at the end just like completely blew my mind. I think I'm a pretty savvy thriller reader. I'm like, oh, I can figure this out, but did not figure that one out. So yeah.
I love literally all of these. I just want to go read now. I'm like, okay, we're gonna end this and I'm not gonna work. I'm gonna go see what books are available on Amazon Prime Day and go get those.
Yes. Well, I don't know if you just heard that big clatter, but I was grabbing my phone to add all of these to my Goodreads TBR.
Well, I can DM them to you too.
Yeah. I'm gonna go back and listen and then get all of them, because every single one has sounded so good. Thank you for all of the awesome recommendations and the variety too. Like it was silly, but we've had people ask us before, like, oh, do you think you should just focus on one genre that you talk about, or like one genre of authors to interview? And we both certainly have genres that we kind of gravitate toward, but I also think we've known each other since we were in high school. And
Oh,
both of us have
cool.
always read across genres too. Like we've never always read one, and we're like, nah, we're gonna talk about everything, and anyone that wants to talk about their book, like we're open to reading it, we're open to talking about it. So I
That's
like the
great.
variety.
I feel
Yeah.
like the one thing that you and I, Brie, always get stumped on though is nonfiction, because
Oh, yeah.
it's just sometimes it's just so hard to get through. I don't know why. I don't know why. I'm even reading one it's my favorite
Mhm.
podcasting duo, and I can't get through it. It's their memoir, but I can't do it.
Because it's less like a story, and it's like it doesn't have the traditional beats of like a fictional story.
Right.
But I agree. I don't read a ton of nonfiction, though. I have read some great nonfiction. Um, I mean, Elizabeth Gilbert, I love her. Big Magic. Everybody in any creative field needs to read that book. But yeah, if you ask me for nonfiction recommendations, I'm gonna have to think about it for a bit.
Yeah, with someone, and I won't name it, like just in case they someone told me, they're like, you have to read this book, and it is like very much a business book.
Mm.
And I said, okay, yeah, I'll get to that. And I did mean that. And then I told my mom about it too. I was like, hey mom, like someone recommended that we read this for business. And she's like, okay, yeah, sure. So she downloaded the audiobook. She's a big audiobook person.
Mhm.
And literally just yesterday, she goes, hey, I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston because you recommended it. And she's like, I loved it so much. I immediately had to start listening to The 7 Year Slip. She goes, so I had to put that other one on hold because like that's just not as interesting. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fine, mom. I get it. Say
I
less
get.
because I can totally relate to that.
Mhm.
Megan, I don't want to miss out on your favorite question about music, if that has
Oh,
been at all on your mind.
always is, always is. I love to ask if there's a specific playlist you like to listen to, if you make a playlist that kind of goes with your book, certain
Mhm.
genre of music. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so when I'm actually writing, I can't listen to music with lyrics because that messes with the words in my head. So I listen to actually a lot of like movie soundtracks.
Oh,
I really like the Legends of the Fall soundtrack. um, or like TV show. I like the Outlander instrumental soundtrack.
Brie, there you go.
Yeah, they're so. But then in terms of, I do make a playlist for the actual book of actual songs with words. So for mine, it's a weird mix because so I'm not a teenager any longer. I know, shocked. But so to get myself sometimes kind of in that like teenage mindset, I like to listen to music that I was into as a teenager. I actually, if I can do a little tangent really quick,
Please.
I was like, why is it that music I liked when I was younger it just resonates so much harder than a lot of the stuff I listen to now? And I got to interview a brain surgeon once as part of my old day job, and he said that's because like the music that you listen to between the ages of like 15 and 25 is always going to be kind of hardwired into your brain in a way that like stuff you listen to later isn't. Um, but I found, and he's like, that's actually what he works with dementia patients. And he's like, I find out what year they were born, and then I play music from their youth, and that actually can help them. And I just find that so interesting. But yeah, I list so on the Girls Who Burn soundtrack, there's some Green Day. That was what I was into as like a young little punk kid. But then I also have a decent amount of Taylor Swift because like angsty, angry girls and like with more modern sensibilities and whatnot. Like Anti-Hero. And I just, after the book was finished writing, when Who's Afraid of Little Old Me came out, I was like, oh, this is perfect for my book. Like, so I can't say it was on there originally, but I did just add it to my Spotify Girls Who Burn playlist. And I think I have some Gaslight Anthem on there too, and oh, some Better Than Ezra, like some stuff from the
Yeah.
90s. Like I'm a little bit older than than teenage years now. Just stuff
Sounds
that
like my ideal playlist.
yeah, I could send it to you, but it's just stuff that reminds me of like summers when I was young for the most part, interspersed with Taylor Swift.
Yeah, which is basically, I feel like, at least what I listen, that's kind of what mine is a little bit like. Even that makes it. There was a night recently that I had to do some like deep cleaning, and I was just not. I did not want to, but I put on a little bit of like 90s and early 2000s with some Taylor Swift, and like I mopped the whole house, and
That's amazing.
I felt very accomplished because of a playlist like that.
Yeah.
So we will definitely have to look at your playlist because I'm probably going to listen to it, and we'll share it too for anyone else that is a lot of our listeners, I think, are around our age, our demographics, if you will, tend to be around that age. So we'll share it for anyone else that is interested. For other people that want to follow you, learn more about you, where can they find you? Go ahead and plug yourself.
Sure. You can find me at mkpagano.com. You can find me at mk_Pagano, I think, on Twitter and Instagram. And then it's just MK Pagano on TikTok. Don't make fun of me for my TikTok videos if you go there. Yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And we'll link to your website and all of your social media accounts too in the podcast notes for anyone that's interested. And then everyone needs to go get Girls Who Burn, which by the time this episode comes out is available for everybody. So everyone can go get that. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, to share so much about your writing journey, which I think is really inspiring and awesome to hear it from you in person. So thank you for sharing all of that and more.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so great talking to you.
You too. All right. Until next time. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.